Expo SDK 54 is out, and if you've been frustrated by the new iPhones, this release comes with actual improvements. Faster iOS builds thanks to pre-compiled frameworks, edge-to-edge layouts by default on Android, liquid glass support on iOS, and many more quality of life improvements. In this video, I'll walk you through all the biggest changes of SDK 54, what will break in your project, and which features you need to have right now. Let's dive in.
Incredible, great, beautiful, awesome, beautiful.
This Expo SDK is a bit different than previous versions because in the past we had sometimes really like flagship things, RSCs, API routes, changes related to Expo Router and many other big things that were released. This one is more about quality of life, speed and stability. So a lot of things happen behind the scenes, but they will still affect your developer life and your applications directly. So let's figure out everything that's important, and I will not strictly go through this post. You can just read this. I definitely recommend this because here's of course everything that you need to know, but I will try to give you the most important pieces and make sense of them in a way. First of all, generally SDK 54 includes React Native 0.81 as well as React 19.1. This is important to know because a couple of the changes mentioned here on this page are actually then related or enabled by these things. So React Native 0.81 was released already in August here on the React Native blog, which support Android 16, faster iOS builds and more. And as well, React 19.1 enabled some pretty cool things which already came with React Native 0.80. But anyway, just setting a baseline, these are the versions from which we can now benefit. Now let's first of all talk about Android. I know it starts with iOS here, but I want to talk about Android first because actually the Android section, I know everyone's in the comments always saying, oh, so cool for the iOS developers, but what about Android? And yeah, I can feel you definitely. Many of the React Native releases seem like they're more targeted towards iOS, but there have been changes for Android, maybe sometimes even before. For example, the pre-compile iOS stuff we're going to talk about, that was actually on Android before. So many cool things are already on Android, and Android is never forgotten. With that being said, React Native now targets Android 16 as well as API 36. Also, edge-to-edge is now always enabled. This is important for the future because this is required on Android, and this now looks somewhat like this. So you can see up here, our application entirely goes to cover the screen. That looks so much better, and you get this now out of the box in new projects. Also, you can enable a predictive back gesture, so your app is not only closed or just going back, but it also actually shows to which previous page you would go. You can get this by setting a specific flag in your app.json. Actually, kind of fun to see that. But honestly, that's mostly it for Android. I'm sorry there's not other big changes, but we will come back to more Expo SDK stuff, and that will of course also benefit Android users. Let's talk about iOS changes. For iOS changes, we have actually a lot more. The biggest thing is of course pre-compiled React Native for iOS. I don't want to dive into everything here, but essentially this means that some dependencies, some packages can be shipped as pre-compiled XC frameworks, which makes your build a lot faster. Now, the reality is that right now, the only thing that comes pre-compiled on iOS is actually React Native. So if you're using Reanimate and if you're using other libraries with C++ under the hood, that will still take time, so you might not notice like a drastic, dramatic change in build times. Yes, they will be faster, and yes, this opens up a bunch of cool things for the future, but right now, the effect might still be limited, so don't get too confused about this. Two cool things about this is that, first, this also enables up the future that more packages will be pre-compiled. For example, Expo, the package itself, as far as I know, is already pre-compiled on Android, not yet on iOS. So more and more packages like Reanimated will potentially be pre-compiled in the future. And on the other hand, this enables Expo and React Native to, in the future, move away from Cocoa Pods. Cocoa Pods is like NPM on iOS. It's like installing your dependencies and the registry, but it's somewhat not maintained anymore, and eventually we as React Native developers have to migrate to the Swift package manager. I honestly fear for that a bit because we just had the new architecture, and changing the package manager doesn't sound great to me. I talked with Jamin on my recent podcast about this, and he also wasn't too optimistic. But anyway, this is a move in that direction. You can read more about that as well if you want on the Expo blog, where it's exactly detailed what this brings. You can also opt out of this with a flag in your app.json if you want to. Now, more iOS related changes are of course iOS 26 and Liquid Glass support. So you can now use the awesome Icon Composer app, which is by the way only available on Mac as far as I know. So I made one of my icons as a glass icon here. And if you save that, you're now able to use this in your React Native application. So these icons are like a folder. So here's my icon, and I can now just specify this in my app.json as the icon. You see a little wiggle here, but don't mind, this just works. I can confirm this, by the way. Here's an application running on my device, and here's the cool icon, and I can now also edit my screen here, customize, and I can use different variants. You see that I have a tinted version. Now I have the default again of my app icon. This is pretty cool, and I think probably most of us should do this. I actually have to update a couple of my apps. I don't want to do this. Why? Anyway, more about Liquid Glass. There is a package called Expo UI, and this is celebrated, and I'm a big fan of Expo UI. When this came out, I said this is everything I always wanted. Expo UI basically gives you access to a bunch of Swift UI primitives in your application, as well as at the same time exposing things from Kotlin directly to your app. So this package is really great. I love the idea. The only problem I have with this package is that it doesn't work I don't want to say it's not reliable. It basically never works really great for me. I'm sorry about that. This package was in alpha, it's now in beta stage, so be very careful with that. Whenever I try to integrate it, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, my application breaks. So really, I would encourage you to be very careful. You can try it out. There are really great things included here, like context menus and loading components and color pickers. I think we talked about this in the previous release, but also, of course, the whole button effect, the glass effects, and the views. It is really great, and I love to see this come together. But yeah, I would be very cautious and very careful about these things. On top of that, of course, we have Xcode 26 support. Currently, it's in RC. I think it should come out very, very soon. As I said, you can use the Icon Composer and the Expo UI, the documentation on building Swift UI apps with Expo UI. Again, try it out, try to follow it, but whenever I try it, my app just breaks. Let's now talk about a couple of Expo SDK and EAS updates. First of all, changes to Expo EAS were made, so you get now a cool hook that includes the download progress. You can use different headers for different channels here, which essentially means you got more control over how EAS updates are handled in your application. So again, having a download progress or reload your application with a command. Pretty cool things that you can now control a lot better. Then there's something that might be quite hard to figure out for, let's say, the regular React Native developer, which is Expo auto linking improvements. Even if you read through this, it might not make too much sense to you what's going on. There's also an article on a blog that I found recently by Phil, which explains the problem even deeper here. I read through it, but I gotta confess, I'm still not a lot better after reading this, but this is very detailed. The problem isn't in the article, the problem is in me. So essentially, this just makes Expo and linking libraries a lot more reliable and more on the same level with React Native. So if libraries have their dependencies and how they're linked into your project is now changed, and it's very much a lot more stable. This has unified behavior across Expo and React Native modules. So in general, it should just work better, especially in bigger projects, potentially even in mono repositories. Regarding or related to Expo SDK, there are a couple of new packages that we should talk about. So the file system plugin was in beta before, is now marked as stable. The cool thing about the changes here were that you can now use pretty much all of the functionality in a synchronous way to create directories, copy directories and files and stuff. That is pretty cool. There's now also a local storage module provided as a drop-in implementation for local storage on the web that you can easily include. Additionally, there's, as far as I found, a new app integrity package, a library that provides access to Google's Play Integrity API on Android and Apple's App Test Service on iOS. Haven't personally used this, but saw this in the documentation, as well as a new Expo Blob package for web standards compliant blob implementation for React Native. I think this one's pretty cool because there can certainly be some problems related to that. Now, I would also count in changes to Expo SDK regarding the Expo CLI. So one of the biggest features of this release actually comes from React 19.1 and the new owner stack feature. This is now also visible here in the Expo CLI in the docs, in the output. Pretty much what this means is that if you encounter a problem in your app, the output here of the error is so much clearer. In the past, when I had issues, sometimes it's really hard to figure out where the problem actually comes from. Now, with this new, you get like, okay, it's here, and it comes originally from React Native maps. So you can really pinpoint this to a file and a library if there's a certain bug in your application. I really love this. This is probably my favorite thing about the latest React Native versions and this release of the Expo SDK. On top of that, we got now React Compiler enabled by default. If you haven't read about React Compiler, there's an article in the Expo documentation. Essentially, it just makes your code better, your React code. You don't have to use Memo all the time anymore. Mostly, you can still use it, but React Compiler improves a lot of things, and I read so much great things already about React Compiler that I very much believe it's a big plus for your application. Yeah, we got owner step, we got React Compiler. Beyond that, I don't think there's too much big going on here. So after the general changes to the SDK, let's also talk now about Expo Router. With SDK 54, we have Expo Router version 6 beta, and with it, a few cool and interesting things. So this is one of the features, and we can actually see this in action in a real application. So let's quickly bring this up, and I got this little application here. So the first thing I did was actually to use native tabs. This is currently marked as unstable, so be a bit careful when using this. There's documentation about this in the Expo docs. Essentially, this enables you to use the native tabs. So this was built with Xcode 26, and this is the iOS 26 beta here on a simulator. And if you use native tabs, you get what you ask for. You get real native tabs. This is the tab bar behavior in iOS 26, and you just get it with React Native out of the box. And the same is true for all these glass effects and the buttons and the stuff in Expo UI. If you use the glass variants, you get all these cool effects automatically with iOS 26. Now, this is not the only cool thing about Expo Router version 6. Additionally, let's see, on the index page, there's something called a link preview now. So I made this little code here. I've wrote this, but there's actually also the code somewhere else. So if you have a link component in your application, you can now have a link trigger, which is my button here. Then you have a link preview component and a possible link menu with actions. In reality, it looks like this. If I now press on this, I get a preview of the link and the page. Also at the bottom, I have this context menu, which is done by this link menu. So all of this up here is the actual link preview. And if I close this again, this button here is essentially the button in the link trigger. So pretty cool component. I really like this. Honestly, I haven't used it too much on iOS myself yet, but anyway, it's pretty cool. Two more things. There's also an improvement to modals. So, you know, the modals on iOS with Expo Router are anyway always pretty cool already. Now, they are also cool on the web. So on the web, we now have iPad-inspired modals and not just things that cover the full screen. I think this is pretty cool. And this just, yeah, it looks really good and it works great. By the way, of course, native tabs also works on Android. So you see, you can provide drawables here for the images. The click stuff isn't working, but that's not a problem. But native tabs also benefit on Android. Finally, there's one more thing. You might even overlook this, but I think this is pretty big. There's new experimental server middleware support. So this is targeting Expo API routes. If you write Expo API routes, you can now have a middleware. So this file, I made this right here, plus middleware.ts at the root of my project. And in here, you could check for headers. You could implement authentication to your endpoints. So in my case, I just made this middleware executed, and let's try and make a request, because now my request should actually be denied with a status 401. So if I go into my testing tool, you see a little log here in the background, middleware executed, and as a result, I get back, you are not authorized to access this resource. I think, once again, this is a almost overlooked cool thing of Expo Router. Just like the modals on the web, pretty cool improvements. It's not like groundbreaking, but it's still a very nice improvement. And by the way, I can maybe also quickly show you what happens usually. So when I usually try to implement Expo UI, again, this is most likely just my own fault, and include that here in my application. What usually happens is Android turns to black and closes, because I would of course need a separate file now for Android, and otherwise it would fail. But here on iOS, how did I open the dev menu? That was not how you do it, right? Yeah, I get problems and everything looks like this, unable to get view config for module. I really don't want to go through that stuff, honestly. I just copied this out of the documentation for my page and just gave it a try, and it didn't work, and that always feels bad to me. But anyway, again, beta, it will get better over time. I have trust in both Expo and the Expo UI package. But speaking of Expo Router, I really like the new updates. Alright, this video is already longer than I expected, so let's come to an end. Just some other updates regarding Apple and Android TV. Actually, experimental Expo Dev Client support for Apple TV and Android TV. Pretty cool, I definitely have to try this out with my Apple TV. Additionally, the Expo Dev Client UI got a refresh, now looks a lot better. I think I forgot to install the package, that's why my Dev Client just looked so bad. And also, there's an improvement related to Brownfield applications. The general integration is a lot better. You can now also reference custom iOS and Android folders if you're a big enterprise company. That's gonna be really helpful. And I think the getting started guide for Brownfield here is actually shorter than I expected. So in the past, this looked really horrible in terms of the changes you had to do, but now it's actually doable. It's not great, but it's like 3-4 steps, and then you have a Brownfield application. So there have been made a lot of changes for Brownfield that will make it better in the future for enterprise companies to integrate React Native into their application, which is a big plus, not only for those companies, but overall for React Native and Expo, and because more people and more companies will use it and bet on it, and that's always great. Additionally, Expo, by the way, has a new homepage. Not really a quality of life improvement for you, but anyway, pretty cool page. Whoever built this, I think it looks great. Finally, let's talk about some deprecations and breaking changes. What will happen to your applications when you upgrade to SDK 54 today? In terms of deprecation and removals, not too much. The biggest thing is actually that the safe area view component has been deprecated in a recent React Native version, but don't fear. You usually already use the React Native Safe Area Context package. So most apps I have seen already use this, and if you use Expo, you usually use this out of the box. So don't be afraid, just make sure you're not using this from the core React Native package. But one thing you need to be careful of is that Expo AV will be removed in SDK 55. So that was the audio video library. And Expo has built over the last year a separate Expo audio and a separate Expo video package. So please, move to those packages, use those packages, because this one will be removed very soon. Additionally, this package now also includes, or the default Expo template now includes React Native reanimated version 4. And reanimated version 4 has two things. First, it has a dependency to React Native worklets, so a separate package to be installed. And as well, it only works with the new architecture. So if you're still using the old architecture, you can't use that. Be careful of that. And as well, make sure you're installing this. But you can also check out the related video to Reanimated 4 on my channel. just be aware that you have the right dependencies installed. You actually don't need the Babel config stuff anymore. That's handled internally by Expo. Also, the Expo file system API, the legacy API, will be removed in the future since we now have the new version. And finally, how do you upgrade? Well, you can just install the latest version with --fix and then also run the Expo Doctor command. I've seen many tweets on X that most people took like a couple of minutes or maybe an hour to upgrade the application because there are not really any breaking changes. And in the past anyway, Expo updates have been very smooth compared to React Native upgrades in the past. If you're already on one of the latest versions, I recommend you go for it. You benefit massively, especially from the pre-built components on iOS, but also you can now tap into Expo UI and Swift. If it works for you, let me know in the comments. And overall, this release should be a smooth upgrade for your app. Alright, that's it for the changelog, the updates on Expo SDK 54. I want to close this with a couple of words. First of all, quoting Expo itself, speed and stability are the themes of SDK 54. We want to make development faster and ensure that the release is easy to upgrade to and stable. I couldn't agree more to this sentence. It's definitely on point for this version. And one more thing that you should be careful of is that SDK 54 is the final release to include legacy architecture support. What does this mean? Well, React Native is freezing the legacy architecture with one of the latest versions. We've talked about this on this channel and on the podcast before. So there will be no changes to the legacy architecture and you should migrate to the new architecture. In the future, potentially in one of the upcoming React Native versions, there is no chance anymore to opt out of the new architecture. So the new architecture will be the default. And when Expo SDK 55 comes out, I'm pretty sure that this will be the case. And I also think they brought this up in the notes that SDK 55 will likely include React Native 0.83 and only support the new architecture. So please make sure that you get your apps ready for the new architecture. On top of that, just a quick note, Expo Go was changed a couple of, I think, months or weeks or years or whatever ago to only include the latest SDK version. So don't be confused. Expo Go now might only support the latest SDK version, which is now 54 as well. And if you're now getting into React Native and need some support, check out galaxies.dev and our Zero to Hero mission if you want to ship your application in no time. We got all the resources you need and we can answer hopefully all of your questions. So check it out at galaxies.dev. You get access to all the courses plus the Zero to Hero mission and eventually a new mission that might come up soon. Alright, don't fall behind with your apps. Update to the latest SDKs so you are happy, your company is happy, and your users will be happy. And if you want to make me happy, hit that like button down there and subscribe so you don't fall behind on what's going on in the React Native ecosystem. I'll catch you in the next video and until then, of course, happy coding, Simon.